I am the doorkeeper, and I had some question and announcement for the last session. We were talking about knowing what the other sector is doing and vice versa. So, we were talking about nutrition. Nutrition links up to the water and sanitation sector, but it also links up to the agriculture and food security sector. And water is linked to both food security and nutrition. And for your knowledge, there is a huge UN report being launched Monday afternoon. This is a report that has been developed by the Committee for Global Food Security, which consists of all the UN member states, the private sector, and the civil society. They work together on these reports, and they have a high-level panel of experts writing a report every year. This year, it's about water. We had a big battle with CIVI to be able to bring this very accurate and important report to the World Water Week, and we will present it with our Secretary of State and FAO representative from Ethiopia on Monday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And why is it important? Well, it's actually a report of the state of art of the interaction of water, food security, and nutrition. It has a lot of recommendations on both water and sanitation, and one of the conclusions that these food security expert comes to that there will be no food security nor nutrition without WASH. But we don't know about it. So you're most welcome. I just want to announce this, and I hope to see many of you on this, because this is where it's also very important that we have a civil society there, because unfortunately the constituency is not able to be represented. So please join us and join the discussion about this very important report. We don't know anything about it, but it's out, and it will be decided on in October. Yes, this is UNCFS HLPE report number 9, Water for Food Security and Nutrition. So they have been doing this. This is more than 150 pages with recommendations for everyone, the government, the private sector, the civil society, and the research. So welcome to this session, and express your opinion about what you want to say regarding water, sanitation, and nutrition. Yeah, we are printing, but we have. This is the announcement of the. Yeah, I have it here, so you can. We finally found out how to print this.
Thank you very much, Magdalena, for the timely announcement. Okay, let's start off with the session. Cities and planning. Now we have a very interesting lineup of 4 presentations in this session. And of course, given the hot topics that we are going to discuss, time will be short. So I would kindly request the presenters to wrap up their presentation 10 minutes flat. We have 2 presentations back to back, and then we will go in for a round of question and answers and discussion.
Just for all presenters to help you, we'll also have a timer here that we're facing you that will be ticking down and will beep when the 10 minutes are over.
Just hope it doesn't explode. Okay, without wasting any time, I would like to invite our first presenter today, Ms. Kate Medlicott. Kate is the technical officer for the Water Sanitation, Hygiene and Health from the Department of Public Health and Environment, the World Health Organization. Kate.
Okay, thank you. I'm a bit embarrassed to say, actually, this is the first SuSanA meeting I've come to, but I hope to be more of a regular attender in future. And yeah, as it was presented, I'm the team leader for sanitation at WHO, and maybe the reason I haven't been here in the past is because we haven't, I think WHO is really well known for our work in drinking water safety, but sanitation safety is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. So I'm here today to present to you the Sanitation Safety Planing Manual, which we published just a couple of months ago on the back of around 3.5 years' work on testing the methodology in 6 cities. So no pressure on the time, Trevor. I'll try and rattle through this. But I just firstly wanted to acknowledge the many people that helped in this effort, specifically EWAG, Swiss TPH, IMI, and lots of scientists and experts who contributed to the risk assessment. So I just wanted to give you firstly a bit of a background about what this is all about and why WHO has a strong interest in this. So, I mean, I think as we all know, we always kind of have this rhetoric, oh, you know, we do sanitation for health, but actually kind of really understanding the specific health risks linked to sanitation systems often plays quite a small role in the planning, and we're trying to kind of bring health back to the centre of sanitation safety planning. And on top of this, we recently published the burden of disease estimates for diarrhoea, and they really clearly showed that yes, sanitation is good for reducing diarrhoea, but if you can actually manage the sanitation chain, the reduction in risk is actually a lot higher. And also, a reference to the next speaker, but you know, the exposure through unintentional use of sanitation waste is really quite high. And we're also seeing this kind of this amazing time happening with sanitation businesses, and the health risks associated with reuse are one of the big barriers to these sanitation businesses. So we see sanitation safety planning as a tool and being able to proactively manage and communicate the health risks associated with these businesses. And you know, some people say to me, oh, why is WHO promoting this stuff? And the quick answer to that really is we're not necessarily promoting it, but acknowledging that this is happening, and that if it's going to happen, then here's how it can be done more safely. And lastly, just to say that we sort of see this tool as having a role to play in the equity discussion, because you know, often the health risks accumulate to the most vulnerable, and often where the investment goes is not necessarily there. So we hope this can bring that aspect into focus a little. So, what is sanitation safety planning? Some of you may already be familiar with water safety planning. It uses the same risk assessment and management principles of water safety planning, and it builds on the 2006 WHO guidelines for safe use of wastewater, grey water and excreta. But what we're seeing is applications of it a little bit broader than just those guidelines. So who's it for? You know, this has to be anchored firstly with health authorities and eventually a policy and regulatory home, but also with direct use by local authorities. We're seeing nice uptake by sanitation enterprises and farmers, interest from utilities, and also, as I mentioned, these sanitation enterprises that are coming out of lots of community-based organisations and NGOs. So I'm just going to really quickly run you through what it's about. So it's a step-based risk assessment approach with 6 steps. So the first is really understanding that, like, who's involved in the sanitation chain, really trying to get the main actors around the table and to develop a sanitation safety planning team. The second is to really understand what the system is. I mean, this sounds kind of basic, but it's quite amazing. I'm sure you all know that quite often, you know, people don't know where the waste is coming from, where it's going to, and how it's being used. So developing a system diagram. Or for those of you who are engineers like me, you may prefer something a bit more process-oriented, and showing the key exposure groups at each of those steps of the sanitation chain. Then it's looking at the risk assessment itself. So for each of those parts, trying to understand what is the likelihood and severity of the hazards at each step. And then just a really simple kind of process of saying, okay, well, if these are the risks, how can we prioritise what to do about it? How can we work with the resources that are available to us to make improvements all the way along the sanitation chain? So that's not necessarily just installing more treatment, but looking at other barriers along the chain. And then the final thing, of course, is monitoring. So understanding, you know, where are we going to monitor, and what are we going to do when the system falls outside those operating limits. And then, of course, this is this principle of continuous improvement and regular reviews. We all know that systems are not static; they change all the time. So building in a process of regular review. So I just wanted to give. I realise that's all quite sort of theoretical, and maybe I can ground this really quickly in some of the examples of where we've been working on this. So you'll see there's 8 places, 7, 8 cities we've been working on this approach, and just to talk a little bit about what's been done there. This is, I think, one of our best examples that came out of the Philippines. And we first started talking to the Philippines, they were going, oh yeah, we'll do a sanitation safety plan for our main wastewater treatment plant. And then when we kind of got the stakeholders around the table, they were like, we have no idea what's happening to fecal sludge in the city. There's lots of it. Let's do our SSP on that. And they came up with a really beautiful plan of investigating where it's going, deciding what they were going to do about it, and a monitoring plan which they're putting into practice now. Another is Lima. It might be a country lots of you are familiar with. Huge agricultural production of vegetables on the peri-urban areas of Lima. Again, I won't go into the details of this, but they've used sanitation safety planning to look at how they ensure those vegetables which pile into the city are safer. Kampala as well. They've been working in the swamp area downstream of the wastewater treatment plant, and are looking now with GIZ to see how they scale that up to build it into the city sanitation plan. Vietnam also, this was a slightly different kind of application of SSP, and I'm trying to show you the variety because unlike water safety planning, which is quite homogeneous, I would say, the applications for SSP are really varied as sanitation systems are. But this one was an example there where they were using the SSP for co-composting of fecal sludge and municipal solid waste to create organic fertiliser. And this is an example from Devonhali, which is on the peri-urban areas of Bangalore. And okay, I'm going. This is that one. I'm sorry, I went too fast for myself. Hang on. Oh, it's moving really slowly. No pressure. I just wanted to say here that this is one from Portugal, and Portugal have really embraced this. So just to point out, this is not for only for developing countries. There's great applications in developing countries as well, and the European Union is looking at a European-wide mechanism for safe reuse. So, I mean, this is I guess the take-home piece. What next? I mean, we want to see this kind of picked up and used and adapted, and we want to hear about what works, what doesn't work. So I guess the final point to leave you on is please come by the WHO stand. There's a massive stack of the manuals you can pick up and use, and not only that, we don't want to just give you a manual and say, there you go. We're actually on hand to send trainers out to organisations who are ready to give it a go, and to support you through developing sanitation safety plans. So, yeah, my contact details are there, and if you're interested, please get in touch.
Thanks for keeping the time. Right, moving on to our second presentation, which is also another tool. I would like to ask Katharine Robb to come over. Katharine is a Public Health Program Associate at the Center for Global Safe Water at Emory University, and Katharine is going to present the SaniPath rapid assessment tool.
Still loading.
Hi, I'm Kate Robb, and I'm the Associate Director of Research Projects at the Center for Global Safe Water at Emory University. And I'll be talking about the SaniPath Rapid Assessment Tool. It's a tool for assessing public health risks from unsafe fecal sludge management in poor urban neighborhoods. The cities of our world are rapidly growing. By 2050, the UN projects that 65% of the global population will live in cities. And this rapid growth has outpaced the ability of many governments to provide basic services like sanitation. I've shown here a excreta flow or ship flow diagram, which Arne will talk more about in the next presentation. But just briefly, it shows the proportion of waste that's treated safely versus unsafely in a city. And we can see down here at the bottom, this is an example from Dhaka, Bangladesh, courtesy of Andy Peel. And we see that in a city with a good amount of coverage in on-site sanitation, still 98% of the fecal sludge ends up back in the environment untreated. But questions remain about where is this shit actually ending up back in the environment, and what are the associated public health risks? In the urban environment, there are multiple pathways of exposure to fecal contamination. Exposure can occur through contact with open drains, consumption of municipal drinking water, flood water, exposure to unhygienic public latrines, consumption of wastewater irrigated produce, contact with recreational or other surface waters, and many other pathways. And given these complex exposure routes with different levels of contamination and different types of contact, it's been difficult to determine what kinds of interventions might have the biggest impact on reducing exposure. Local governments and development partners lack evidence-based tools to assess the relative public health risks from fecal contamination. And little is known about what pathways of exposure pose the greatest public health risk, or what are the public health implications of poor fecal sludge management for poor neighborhoods. And how should policymakers prioritize sanitation investments that might have the biggest impact on reducing public health risk? To meet this gap, we developed the SaniPath Rapid Assessment Tool, which is designed to assess public health risks related to poor sanitation and to help prioritize sanitation investments based on the exposures that have the greatest public health impact. We designed the tool based on an in-depth risk assessment that we conducted in Accra, Ghana. And the tool is a systematic and customizable method to collect relevant data on exposure to fecal contamination in low-income urban environments. The tool is designed to be used by community, government, and development partners to help guide decision-making and advocacy surrounding urban sanitation. And the tool synthesizes data using an open source software package. And the tool, so far, we've used it in Accra, Ghana, Vellore, India, and Maputo, Mozambique. The following pathways in the public domain can be assessed using the tool: floodwater, exposure to surfaces and public latrines, soil in public areas, surface waters, public drinking and bathing water, wastewater irrigated produce, and open drains. Two kinds of data are used as inputs for the tool. We use behavioral exposure data and environmental microbiology data. For the behavioral exposure data, we conduct surveys on the reported frequency of exposure that leads to exposure to fecal contamination. So, for example, we ask questions like, how often do you come into contact with open drains? How often do you consume municipal drinking water? Things like that. For the environmental microbiology data, we collect environmental samples from the relevant pathways, so samples of drinking water, samples of soil, samples of drain water, and we analyze those for E. coli, a common indicator of fecal contamination. The data are then combined to show the relative risk of exposure. We show first the frequency data and the contamination data separately. So in the pie chart, we show the frequency of exposure to, in this case, raw produce of children in a neighborhood in Ghana. And we can see that the majority of children consume raw produce every day, about 6% consume raw produce never, and the rest fall somewhere in the middle. And then we have samples of produce from that same neighborhood, and this histogram shows the distribution of contamination on samples of raw produce. We then bring the behavioral frequency and the environmental contamination data together, along with other parameters like intake volume, duration of exposure, transfer efficiencies. Here I've shown the frequency and environmental data for public drinking water. We bring those together to form a risk profile. The tool uses a Bayesian analysis to estimate the distribution of contamination and the frequency of exposure. And then the mean dose and proportion of the population exposed are summarized in these risk plots, which I'll explain on the next page. So these risk profiles, here we see exposure to drinking water in 2 neighborhoods, one in Ghana, one in India. The proportion of the population in red or pink are the people exposed, green are the unexposed, and the intensity of the red or pink color shows how high the average dose of fecal contamination is. So here we see that a greater proportion of the population on average is exposed each month in this neighborhood in India compared to the neighborhood in Ghana, and that the average dose consumed is higher in India, as evidenced by the darker color red of the people in the diagram. We can also use these diagrams to compare risks within a neighborhood. So each of these plots are for the same neighborhood in Ghana, and we see separately adults on the top and children on the bottom. And by looking at the ratio of red to green, we can see what proportion of the population is on average exposed each month. And then looking at the darkness of the red color, we can see how high the dose is. So here in this neighborhood, it looks like raw produce is not only the darkest color red, or the highest dose of fecal contamination, but also the greatest proportion of the population exposed. So in this neighborhood, it may make sense to target an intervention towards reduction or reducing wastewater irrigated produce, or finding alternatives so that there isn't as much wastewater irrigated produce in use. One thing I want to point out here is that you may be thinking for the open drains and drinking water that the color of the red is very similar, and you may think open drains are much more contaminated, so why is that? And that's because we take into account the intake volume. So for the drain water, people consume a very small amount, whereas drinking water, they consume a lot more, and it ends up, at least in this neighborhood, averaging out to a similar dose. So in summary, the tool is used to guide users through the collection of relevant data to estimate relative public health risk. The tool provides users with an easy-to-use software interface for data collection that can be customized to fit different country contexts. The tool synthesizes data to guide community, government, and service providers in their decision-making. Some of the limitations are that the tool is designed for use at a neighborhood level and not a city level, and it doesn't actually measure health outcomes, but stops at exposure. The tool is a work in progress, and we're working to try to get the tool used as much as possible so we can keep learning and keep improving the tool. Right now we're working on adapting the tool to optimize the user interface and some of the output. We're also working to identify candidate cities for tool deployment where major sanitation interventions are being considered, and we're developing a stakeholder advisory board. In conclusion, I'd like to make an appeal to the members of the SuSanA Forum for input. We're looking for suggestions about where we can deploy the SaniPath rapid assessment tool, and ideas for partners who are working at the city level and interested in deploying the tool to inform sanitation interventions. We're looking for partners who could use these kinds of data in their work, or institutions that would be good candidates to learn how to use the tool. And lastly, we're also looking for suggestions for candidates for our advisory committee to help us understand more about what are the greatest challenges facing sanitation decision makers, at what scale are decision makers most interested in, is it city versus neighborhood, and how can we best engage potential users of the tool, how can we best convey risk results visually, how can we facilitate the translation of the tool recommendations into actionable interventions. I'd like to thank everyone involved in this project from multiple institutions. And You can download the SaniPath Rapid Assessment Tool from sanipath.com. It's an older version that's there right now, but we're working on a newer version that will be available sometime this fall. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Katharine. So, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, we've seen two tools, quite handy, I think, for practitioners, and quite interesting to use in the sanitation planning process, I would say. I'd like to open the floor for question and answers. Let's take a set of 5 questions first. Before you state it, please your name and organization, as well as whom is the question or the comment directed to. Please. Let's have a show of hands.
For the presentation. I know from the water safety planning that there are these very nice risk assessment forms, so that it's very well used and easy to understand, and then you immediately get a rank. So how high is the risk of this water supply? So is there something similar that you have in this part? I mean, that is especially relevant, I think, for decentralized systems. So I wonder, that was my first question. Second question, there was also developed a sort of wash safety plan. So I know one publication somewhere around that. So what is the difference between sanitation safety planning and wash safety planning?
Anyone?
Hi, I'm Susan Davis, and I'm tired. I'm going to sit down with Improve International. And I'm curious with the water safety planning, and you said there's a lot of, there's a lack of information about where fecal sludge is going. And how do you find that out? Do you have shit detectives? I mean, do you track it down?
Alan Reid from Goal. Just a question on the SaniPath. You say it's a rapid assessment tool, but it looked quite involved. I wonder if you could just elaborate on your experience of, maybe cost as well, how long that takes, and some cost. But I'd also be interested in talking about Nairobi as well.
Yes, thank you. This is just a question from online for Katharine. I'll slightly paraphrase it. Basically, just wanting to find out the work that you've been doing in SaniPath, for how much longer do you have funding to do it? And if that is in the near future, where is the funding going to come from to continue the work? Just so that folks have an idea of how long this work's carrying on for.
Could we have a set of answers first? 2 questions each.
So yeah, in answer to your question, yes, there are the same kind of risk assessment tools in there, and you can apply them in the same way. I think the thing that's really different is that with water safety planning, you've just got one exposure group, and that's the person who's drinking the water at the end of the pipe. And for the sanitation safety planning, there's multiple exposures, and the risk assessment's a bit harder, and I think that's a nice kind of link with SaniPath there, because the thing about water and sanitation safety planning is that we're targeting the people who manage these systems, and they're not necessarily people who can do a complicated risk assessment. So the tools are there. We would always encourage that there's kind of someone from the local academia who can be involved to do a really robust risk assessment. But maybe to answer the question over here about how people do that in practice, I mean, there's this principle of continuous improvement. So honestly, with some of these, the way they do it is just walking around sniffing and just looking at where things are going, and that risk assessment can get more robust over time. But the point is applying these kind of principles with the risk assessment as the backbone of the approach by which you then start looking at improvement and monitoring that's within the means of the group doing it. So this is all trying to get away from really kind of rigid threshold values for effluent and other things, and trying to take a more pragmatic approach to managing systems. Oh, and you asked about combining the wash safety plans. And, I think that's a really fair point. I mean, if we were to be entirely holistic, then we would do water and sanitation safety plans. And I think, all as one process. I think that works quite well at a small community level where things are kind of compact enough that you can analyse it like that. Once you're getting to kind of the city scale, the stakeholders and the approach becomes a bit unwieldy, I think, and it's probably a bit more manageable to do water safety planning and sanitation safety planning separately. But we certainly don't want to constrain people's use of it. If you can make it work like that, great.
Thanks for the question. So I'll start with the question about the rapidness of the SaniPath rapid assessment tool. So we call it rapid because the original study that we did to figure out how we wanted to do exposure assessment in urban slums took over 1.5 years and cost over $2 million to try to assess all the different conceivable pathways of exposure to fecal contamination. Based on that study, we really narrowed it down to what pathways and what kinds of methods were really giving us the most bang for the buck. And we narrowed it down to now the study takes about a month in each place, depending on how many relevant pathways there are. So for example, if there isn't an ocean, there's no surface water. If people don't consume wastewater irrigated produce, if there's ways you can cut down the different pathways and it's faster. If there's lots of pathways, then it can take a little longer. And as far as the labor involved, so you need a team of enumerators who can do the surveys and a team who can go out and do the sampling. So usually we have between 4 and 5 enumerators, 4 and 5 environmental samplers, and then several lab technicians who are analyzing the samples. And we try to collect at least 10 environmental samples per exposure pathway. So the cost really depends on what local labor costs in a given context, plus supplies for the microbial analyses, which are several dollars on the average if you already have the equipment per sample. And as far as funding, we just got a supplemental grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to continue our work for the next 2.5 years. But one of the big goals of this new chunk of funding is to try to make the tool self-sustaining. And so we're looking for ways that we can get the tool used more often and to have different cost-sharing initiatives so that the tool is used by different governments, that there's that there's more capacity developed to use the tool independently, and that eventually the tool won't require any involvement from Emory in order to deploy successfully.
Thank you.
Okay. One brief question to each presenter. Thank you very much, both of you. So Kate, I just wondered how much this sanitation safety planning tool sort of incorporates the sort of detailed methodology of the SaniPath and of the shit flow diagram, which we'll hear about in the next presentation. And will it be necessary to update the publication? Katharine, I mean, congratulations to Emory, to your group for elaborating this tool, which I think is simple but very necessary. WSP is actually applying it, testing it as part of its fecal sludge management diagnostic toolkit. So it will hopefully sit within a toolkit that we're producing. My question, I mean, it's, I think we've made great advances, but I just wondered the extent to which you think the tool is complete in mapping the pathways between the underlying risk, which is the sort of the fecal waste, where it gets to, and then how it gets onto people and into their mouths, essentially. So, are you looking at the sort of fingers and food dimension? And for fluids, for drinking water, are you taking samples from tap water and from the glasses that people drink from? Because it may be in their drinking water source, but if they treat it at home, then you've sort of mitigated the risk, partly or fully. So, yeah, sorry the challenge, but I think it's important to have a complete understanding of why people are getting sick. Thank you.
Would you like to answer the question right away?
Yeah, so just in terms of those two other tools, I think they're kind of complementary, and especially the SaniPath. I mean, I think the thing that's different with SaniPath and Sanitation Safety Planning is that, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's kind of more diagnostic, and that's the part that the SSP managers quite struggle with, and the SSP is more of a management tool. So I think it can really be integrated to make the risk assessment stronger so that the management approaches are actually more relevant. So I think we could certainly do that. And then with the SFD stuff, yes, I mean, I think that works at the kind of the city or maybe even national scale. That's all kind of in the wash. But the SSP can be applied at lots of different scales, and it really applies mostly to the management boundaries of the people who are... So for example, if you're a business who's co-composting fecal sludge and making compost, then the kind of flow pathways are within that chain, which is not necessarily the same chain as a SFD. But so I think the principles can be applied, and maybe we could update it. I haven't really thought about it that far, though.
Thanks for your question, and it's a good one. So in our in-depth exposure assessment in Ghana, that's where we really did a much more comprehensive look at what are these different exposure pathways, and not just, from drain water to the mouth, but how it's actually getting there, and how we have I can't remember how many hours, but several hundred hours of structured observation watching young children interact in their environment, and how frequently they're putting their hand to the mouth, how much time they spend in open drains, what the contamination is in those open drains, how often they're feeding, how often they're drinking water, what kind of water, all that. And we're able to do a much more nuanced risk assessment with that. With the rapid tool, we've made a lot of different trade-offs in order to make it rapid. So, for example, we just take municipal drinking water. We don't take water samples within the home. And part of that is because we see more of city-level decision-making happening at the municipal level and trying to improve municipal drinking water, rather than more of a behavioral intervention of treating drinking water in the home. So we don't take into account, we actually do ask about whether or not people drink their water, but right now our models are whether or not people treat their water, but right now our models don't take into account whether or not that water is treated, although we certainly could try to do that in the future. And there may be other relevant pathways, and if any of you have ideas about, maybe you're thinking of a city and there's an exposure pathway that we haven't captured, we'd love to hear about that so we can include it. But I guess in each of these pathways, there's a lot of assumptions built in about what do we think are transfer efficiencies from, soil to hand, from hand to mouth, all that kind of stuff that is all kind of built into the tool in the back end and can be customized, but it's one of the trade-offs in making it rapid.
We're running out of time. I'll take 4 questions, and yeah.
Okay, thank you. Very brief. Yes, I'm interested in how ultimately this leads to local governments being able to deliver better services. Yeah. So I was going to explain that, but there's no time for that. But what we're seeing is in Indonesia, for example, there has been this tool which is environmental health risk assessment that was developed by Christine Seibesma from IRC, and also with a lot of support from Isabel Blackett. And that has now been implemented, I think, in over 400 cities. And I think what we're seeing is it's also a neighborhood approach. What we're seeing is that it does a lot to sensitize people about the importance, but it doesn't really translate ultimately to better services. And sometimes the tools we are making are very good to sensitize and put issues on the table, but they're not as easy and practical to apply in order to really come to those better solutions. So I'm asking you, how do you see the future? Is this a research that you're doing with a lot of applications of SaniPath and maybe even the sanitation safety plans, where ultimately there will come some generic lessons and priorities out of this? Or do you see this as a tool that will continuously be used at local level to define their own priorities, etc.?
Thank you.
Just a question related to the SaniPath research. How do you define children? Because you had adults and children, very useful, but children are also the 0 to 1 to 1 to 4 adolescents.
Thank you.
Very quickly. Thank you very much, WHO. After WSP, we have the SPP, the Water and Sanitation Plan. We've got the Sanitation Safety Plan. What have you thought of maybe mixing the two? Because actually they're both relevant and they're both integrated, actually, water and sanitation. So I think what I liked about the WSP, not Water and Sanitation Program of the World Bank, but the Water Sanitation Plan that you had, the Water Safety Plan, you had this vision from the beginning to the end, including sanitation as well. So where are we now with this issue? And then for the Emory, I mean, I recognize also the always excellent work that the Emory University is doing. So great job. And I'm just trying to share. You know, we just came back. I was saying from Kinshasa. We're trying to implement some sanitation issues because sanitation is almost zero there for 13 million people. The thing is, the technology, okay, we got different aspects and we try to, you know, get everything okay. But the big issue was a business issue, was trying to get this thing moving and sustainable and that it could be running by itself, because going through a tax system was not possible. Going through cost recovery issues, traditional cost recovery was not a real issue. So how do you get this moving actually financially? So this business approach was actually the crucial thing to look at.
Thank you. Very quick answers. Sorry, I have to rush.
So quickly on that linking again with water safety planning and sanitation safety planning, absolutely, and you know I think that's where it's heading. But the application of them at the same time in the same place seems to be working best in some of the things that are coming out of the European region and small communities. Not to say it couldn't be done elsewhere, but that's where we're at with it now. To quickly pick up on your point with businesses, and I think you know, that's maybe a place where WHO can add a bit of value. We're finding from the business side that they find it kind of helpful to be able to say, yes, we are proactively managing our system according to a methodology, you know, that's recommended by WHO. So I think it gives them some legitimacy to some of these businesses that have been kind of forced to operate informally or with a lot of questions around their operation. And then your question about planning and how you kind of embed this. I think maybe as a parting comment, it's quite nice to see, you know, there's the other tool you mentioned, there's SSP and SaniPath. But I think it's really great we're having a discussion at all about risk-based sanitation planning, whether we use the SaniPath brand or WHO's SSP brand. It doesn't, from our side, it's kind of less important than the fact that we're doing risk-based planning. And I think where the SSP kind of helps, as you say, is to try and kind of embed this into a planning and management process, so going beyond the identification of risks, but really making a multi-sector plan about what to do about it within the resources that are available. So we're you know, learning and going ahead with it, but it seems to be fulfilling that purpose where we're trying it so far.
Thanks. So to answer the question about use of the tool by governments and kind of the future of the tool, one of our research objectives for this new stage of our grant is to try to figure out how the tools actually could be used. Right now, we've applied the tool in 3 places, but we haven't actually seen uptake and use of the results for any kind of policy or intervention decisions. And that's something that we really want to try to see. And so we're going to be one of our goals is to try to partner with groups who can use the tool and try to learn from how this information is used. And I guess our goal is that it would be a tool that's used by different city or development partners indefinitely. But I think another outcome that would be also very relevant is creating essentially a database of what exposure looks like in different cities that then could be used by other cities to say, oh, like this was a problem in this city. We have a similar profile to the city. Maybe wastewater irrigated produce is a problem for us too, or maybe it's open drains or whatever. So I think we're open to seeing kind of how it evolves, and that's definitely embedded within our research question for this grant. As far as how we define children, so in this rapid assessment, it's children who are between the ages of about 8 to 12, and we ask children the survey questions in school. So that's why we've kind of honed in on that target age group, thinking that children younger than that probably won't be able to really articulate how frequently they do these different activities, and because a lot of these pathways aren't necessarily relevant for very young children. We did do some of this in a sub-study in India, where we do have some data on children under 5, but it's limited.
Okay. We're short on time, sorry. You have any more questions, comments, you could always catch them for a coffee. And without any further ado, I would ask Arne to come up and present the progress in the shit flow diagrams.
Yes, I think it's fine here. We were talking in many SuSanA meetings when we were discussing the compendium of sanitation systems, how important it is to have the systems approach, and that it's important not only to look at the toilet but to look at the chain, and that has been reflected in a number of presentations today as well. So I was excited when I saw the first excreta flow or sludge flow or shit flow diagram presented by WSP 2 years back, because there it was, a diagram that has the systems approach, has the full chain, looks at centralized and decentralized systems and brings it all into one picture. I was really excited about it, and I was even more excited when the discussion came up, can't these diagrams be sort of hosted, harbored by SuSanA as a neutral place, because more and more people are getting interested in it. And that's why we got a 1-year grant from the Gates Foundation to get that going. And we're currently talking about a next phase of 3 years. So where are we? And I have not talked close enough to the mic. I hope the people out there have heard something. The origin is the review, more detailed, on fecal sludge management in 12 cities by WSP, which appeared in March. There the diagram is just one element. It's as well very much on service delivery assessment in the different categories. Who is, if there's no money to maintain an infrastructure, if there's no capacity to run it properly, then to put an investment is wrong. So a number of analyses was there, and in April 2014 there was this missing link in sanitation service delivery research brief. That's how it started. I just phrased that, and in last year it was Peter Hawkins from WSP who in this room explained the approach, and in the core group meeting we said yes, it's a great idea to have that on the website and to have SuSanA sort of the place where this happens. So now we had workshops in Hanoi and Dhaka, and this year in August we'll launch the portal, and that will be in a longer event on 26th, launch of the SFD portal, room FH202, and we'll have 90 minutes to go into more detail on that. And in the afternoon there's another workshop where one of the tables as well will concentrate on the diagrams and their use. The initiative is GIZ together with the University of Leeds, Barbara Evans there, WEDEC, that's Rebecca, the EAVAC, and from WSP it's Isabel Blackhead and Peter Hawkins who are involved, and the Gates Foundation it's funding it, thanks the foundation. And thanks to everybody of the group that they are thinking SuSanA is a good place to do that. This is now sort of, if you think of all possible options, then this is the summary of all options. So the real ones are simpler, but you see the chain on the top. The upper half is sort of what happens in centralized systems, and the lower half is what happens in on-site systems, and the small one is open defecation. And I talked about it's a visualizing tool that summarizes and presents what happens to excreta in cities. One example is Moshi, Tanzania. There, this idea was brought in, and 4 stakeholders, 4 ministries of Moshi or from the administration came together. In any case, they wanted to have a strategy on how do they deal with sanitation. So this idea to develop jointly a diagram was there, and they got very excited about it. And I think that's the best way to do it. If the city itself is sort of then discussing, is it so much or is it more, and on what data we can rely, because then it's very much owned by the cities. And then you have the upper part, which is usually the smaller one, which is let's say legalized. There are sewers, there are treatment plants, you can get data on them, but you have the fecal sludge management, which is open, often informal or illegal. So how can you get official data on something which is not official? So there it comes that you have to guess, that you have to estimate, and that the data will not be. It's important that the data are credible, because you're transparent how you get them and what's the variation in them, and it's the best situation if an administration itself is sitting together. We always said that if this diagram now, you had the example of Dakar, where there's very little central system, and there's many % of on-site systems. So if the reaction would be, okay, let's build a treatment plant, but there's only 5% sewers, so 95% of the problem is not addressed by any treatment plant. So that's a very simple message. But even here you have more parts in a central system. Is it? No, you don't have. You have. It's again that on the upper one is quite small. But even if you have, then it could be a mistake to build a large infrastructure if you don't have the money to maintain it and don't have the capacity to maintain it. That's why we said that the context description on what's sort of the service delivery context is very important, not to have misleading messages. And that's sort of that the diagram never comes alone. It comes with general city information, with a service delivery context. What are the outcomes of services? How do they work? Which stakeholders were involved to produce the diagram? What's the credibility of the data? I was mentioning that. And then what was the process of developing it? And then list of data sources as well to be transparent there. We're aiming to develop 50 of those, and thereby influencing how the sector talks about sanitation, not just toilet, but having that sanitation chain approach there and looking at the whole picture. And I think that would be a great achievement to come there. We've made a web portal, which is part of the SuSanA portal, where you'll find all the informations. Up to now, mainly the 8 drafts of 8 cities, and just sort of citing the 12 cities from the WSP study. And the methodology and tools are coming in the next weeks and months, because they were very busy to get them ready. And there are lots of requests on how can I do it, but that's exactly the aim, what we want to achieve. Okay, that's one thing is to spread the word here in Stockholm. The other thing is that now really to include more SuSanA partners, feedback from SuSanA once we have the tools there to really on the methodology, how you like it, how to roll it out. And these are sort of the points of discussion. Can SFD be a game changer for cities? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? I'm quite convinced that they can influence the discourse in the right direction, that it's not toilet concentrated, but it's on the chain, it's on the service delivery. But are you of the same opinion? How to best put it into practice, how to have many SuSanA partners sort of promoting it, getting it done, and well, how to address these opportunities with SuSanA. Thank you.
Thanks, Arne. Unfortunately, we are still quite short on time. I would quickly ask Professor Thomas Kluge to come up for his presentation. Would you like to use this one?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks a lot for invitation. I have 10 minutes, I know that. I will give you a case study example and build some connections to my partners talking about how to improve sanitation practices. I'm telling you from a case study in north central Namibia. Namibia is one of the driest countries of the world. And the region where we are acting since 10 years is characterized by a change of flooding time in rainy season and dry season of 7 to 8 months. And therefore we built it together with the National Integrated Water Resources Management Plan, a pilot project. You can see it's located in south, the border of Angola in north central Namibia. And what we shaped together with the people on the ground is a variety of sanitation facilities at first. We did it together with the Technical University of Darmstadt, with Namibian Ministry of Water Affairs, and with our institute called Institute for Social Ecological Research. What we realized here, you can see, is that we discussed first with the people what are the needs, how we can shape sanitation facilities. You see here the so-called check dwellers area. There is people in self-related erected houses, very small houses, and there we connected them to a sewage system, and we built up a wash house embedded in an informal settlement. And the third thing we built up is the so-called cluster units. That means 4 households in the informal settlements is sharing toilet, shower, and hand washing facility. And all this sewage is collected and brought to an anaerobic pre-treatment, where we also realizing the sludge bringing to a drying bed, so that the sludge is hygienized. And we are using also methane gas for self-sustaining the electrical infrastructure, and after that it's by an aerobic process purified. And we have, after this rotating biological contactor, a microstraining unit. Microstraining because the population is affected by helminth eggs in a big percentage. And after that, it's an UV disinfection installed. And this water, where we before derived energy, it's full with nutrients like nitrogen, calcium, phosphate, and brought to this pond. And then we take it by drip irrigation for irrigation. That means we are closing the whole chain between sanitation and reuse. And it is one of the key elements, reuse, for this region on the longer run to manage the water problem, because this town we are working in the moment is doubling every 3 years. And this is an approach where we can adapt to this enormous growing process. And we are realizing the semi-central approach also in China, in parts of Germany, and here also in Africa. And I think the main message is from this project that we have to realize some, I can say, problems and also challenges, how to organize the governance of maybe the wash house. It's a frequency to 250 people per day. People is coming from Angola and also from the town, from the informal settlements. And there is to find out a balance between the calculation of entrance fee and also the water amount is used. In the cluster unit, I want only to show that the committees organizing these clusters by the 4 households, it's a self-organized cleaning system. There's a challenge also between the town council and these committees to organize this work in a good manner. Very simple is it in the check dwellers in the individual houses. And if you look to this chain between wash house, cluster units, individual houses, it's also a mirror in the development of a town on the longer run. And you have some challenges to deal in this context. That means to look to the governance structure that it's working good. The main challenge for us were how is accepted the water reuse for irrigation means in human consumption to irrigate vegetables. And I showed before the technical details, and you can see that step by step it's 100 million E. coli and the same rotaviruses. It's diminished in the whole chain of purification that you can see you are on the sure side with this water. And this is a precondition. You cannot realize water reuse without a technical line like this. And this is one of the challenges, I think, for the future, that we cannot go under these preconditions if we want to realize water reuse for human conditions, for human consumption under these conditions. This is one of the main messages I want to bring out. We also had an open communication, risk communication in this project. I will only show you how it's in this indigenous language formulated. You can see to wear gumboots and gloves and also hand washing, applying pesticides and all these things. If you are communicating in an advance, it is accepted also by the people. The products are sold on the local market and very highly accepted. If I have 2 minutes more, or I'm in time, okay. What we learned now is that in this region, the normal wastewater flow goes to so-called evaporation ponds. You see it here in this more technical slides. The water is collected in ponds and they are filled up with sludge, and on the top is water. That's a normal situation. And in every rainy season, it's flooding over and cholera breakout is coming into the people. That's a normal situation. And we are looking also to manage this in the sense that we are building here in first an anaerobic unit where we can build a trap for the sludge and to manage the sludge in the sense that it's hygienically good managed, and after that on the end more simple techniques for purifying the water. That means is fit for purposes like irrigation for fodder, for animal fodder or something like that. On the last here you can see this is the Kuvu Waters project approach, but it's on a high technical state. So we are looking in the moment also to deal with this system. And I like to close with this remark that if we, on the long run, like to manage the water crisis in this country, there's no way against water reuse and water reclamation, because the whole country is on this part, 1.5 million people on the Konene River, and the Konene River hasn't anymore the eco-flow in the moment. And we have the 30 years of dryness. And we have to look after the preconditions. What does that mean? Water reuse and water reclamation in such parts of countries affected by climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation on the practical application of water reclamation and reuse. 5 minutes left for the entire session. Okay. All right. We have 5 minutes left. Floor is open for questions.
It's just a question that came in from online, from Elizabeth van Munch, for Thomas Kluge. She says, how is O&M funded beyond September 2015 when the current funding ends?
What I showed is in full ownership of the town of Utapi, and the project is ending this year in December, and then it's in full property of the town of Utapi, and the time was very short. The biggest challenge was the capacity development, that we were able to train the people in the manner on the field side and on this plant. So it's full working now.
Yeah, I had a question to Arne. Is he around? So, yeah, the prospects of rolling out the SFD analysis to more cities around the world, is it still at the stage of you developing an appropriate technique, an appropriate process, or how close are you to being able to really put a lot of effort and have, I don't know,
Many cities.
100,000 cities.
Yes. I think there are different dimensions. One is that there's demand on different levels. Like in Moshi, there are other examples where cities just see the diagram and it's a tool for them to talk to each other. They don't care about the context description and some details of methodology. They go with it. And that's a trend, and we try to support this and to go with that simple thing. There's a second dimension where it's maybe the best example is India. They have a very sophisticated process of city sanitation planning. They have a national strategy for city sanitation. And there the tool is just adding at a certain point and can be sort of embedded. The question is, will it be embedded? It seems yes. It seems it's really useful. And there's then that we, with this initiative, try to bring the whole range of tools to say that what is a credible context description, what's the minimum you need, where I would say that we're getting simpler, we are getting more user-friendly, but now we have 8 up on the website in a draft version. We hope in February to have 50 up there, and in the second phase to concentrate on being closer to the demand of cities and to test what we have. Is it suitable for what cities can do and want? So the short answer is it's not that we are ready now, but I think we have done quite a part of the way in that direction.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I have another question to Arne, and it's: have you look at the link to the SDGs and the monitoring? One thing that what you're doing is a good inventory that could be possibly used for the monitoring of the SDG and the.
Yes,
is that something you have been looking at? The other and the second one is also greywater, for example, more integrated wastewater management. How do you incorporate that kind of questions into your models?
The diagram seems to be very inspiring. So if you talk with somebody who has a new idea how to use it for emergency camps, use it for mapping of health exposure, use it for mapping of business opportunities, use it for a national level. And we're trying to as well sort of harvest these ideas and to document them. We're starting with it, and that's one dimension. And the other thing is that in the morning we were saying that actually we need cities and nations to be motivated to gather data. Only then we can get the data we need on the higher level. So SFDs are seen to have potential to support this process. And the project is actually then asking the question, can you never compare two cities? Because every city will make use of the diagram and the tool, but it will make use so different from the second city. So then how can you aggregate it? So the effort of the project is quite a bit to say that, can we do it in a standard way? Even if that might be slightly less suitable to the individual city. So maybe we do twice. One that's Moshi and how Moshi wants to do it, and one that would be to the standardized of the 50. There are quite some expectations, and that's why I was so as well happy about the morning that there's more flexibility to learn while going to get the right answers, because that's the question we have. So, but we have purposefully not included that in the project because that's sort of overwhelming. It's clear that what we want to do wants to be at service for that, but if we would include that into our tiny little project.
It's a follow-up to that, more of a kind of a
yes, Kate,
comment.
You could actually better answer that part of the question, perhaps.
Well, I don't know, but it's a pretty unanswerable kind of question at the moment. But just to say that, you know, those of you who have been following the SDG process, you know, we have the outcome document now, which is great. We've got a water goal, so that's a huge step forward. We have these targets now, 6.2 and 6.3, which cover the sanitation chain, wastewater and sanitation, which nicely brings together these two parts from basic sanitation through to reuse. And the indicator framework, the proposed indicators, I think will really allow us to use this framework, and that's certainly what we've proposed. The question that keeps me up at night now is how the hell we do it. Because, I mean, this is super useful at the city level, but for the global assessment, we have to have it has to be statistically based, and I think we have to kind of go from what's being done at the city level, which is great, but a lot of it's secondary data and key informant interviews, which is perfect at the city level, but it's going to be harder to use that for national level assessments and global level statistics to say, oh, this was based on a key informant interview. So we have to kind of build in that statistical component, and that's where we're headed now. And if I was to kind of imagine in 5 years' time, I would love to see like the same kind of SFD base kind of template with all the boxes the same, with slightly different ways of estimating the flows in those boxes for cities, which is more action-oriented at the city level, and for national and global level kind of comparisons and statistics-based. So yeah, that's. I think we're all headed in the right direction. Is the short answer, but a lot of work to go.
There's a show of hand here.
Very briefly, it's a thank you to GIZ for taking up the charge, I guess, in terms of representing sanitation as a sanitation chain and putting that out there so broadly. It's time, and I really appreciate that that's what you're doing. The other thing that I appreciate is that first and foremost you put in the center place is what is going to be most useful for the cities to progress towards their end goal, because ultimately that's rolling out the statistics. What we want to see is that on the ground people have better sanitation.
Thank you.
One more question, that's it, or a comment.
No, yeah, I think it's an exciting project, and I'm looking forward to all the data. But leaving the flowers aside, I've been arguing in several occasions now that for the shit flow diagram, it's a real shame that we have containment only, and that we have not aligned with the EWAC sanitation value chain that we made, which has user interface and then containment. Because what we are seeing in a lot of the cities in Asia, I know it's different in Africa, is that people do have toilets, but there's no containment. Okay. There's actually, and when you're making a shit flow diagram where the containment is red because people don't actually have a septic tank, it goes directly to the drain, etc., then that bit is red. But for the city who has just achieved so-called full coverage, that's really disappointing. So I would like to see the user interface as a separate category in the shit flow diagram, and then make that green, and then say to people, yeah, but do you see that septic tanks that they have are no septic tanks? Or especially in the wet countries, you know, that is a big issue. Because it goes directly to the drain, because it overflows, etc., etc.
Thanks, Antoinette.
Thank you. All right. I think we're up with time, and
I leave it with a thank you, because the question is, what is a septic tank? We come back to the question, to the functional definitions and so on, but these are the right discussions. Let's put it like this. I think these are the right discussions. That's what I would say.
all right. Yeah, sorry. Thanks a lot for the 4 speakers. A round of applause, please. And it was really interesting discussions. I'd like to close the session